Hello, my name is Greg Remke. I direct programs at Economic Thinking. We do workshops and provide online resources on the economics of announced high school and homeschool and world schools debate topics and motions. So, presentation here, retribution, rehabilitation, and restitution, or restitution in a just criminal justice system. For the WHO 2020 motion, this House believes retribution should not be a function of the criminal justice system. Similarly applies to the current NSDA public school, the U.S. public school topic. The federal government should have substantial reforms in the criminal justice system, either in forensic science, policing, or sentencing. So retribution as part of sentencing could be changed to rehabilitation or restitution, and I'll be discussing the economics and some of the history of this in this presentation. The overview is the criminal justice system is far more expensive and lacks institutional safeguards that it should have to better serve the general public, the victims of crime, as well as the people who commit crimes in many cases. So let's look at some of the issues here. So first, some arguments against retribution, some arguments for the negative. You could argue that the criminal justice system is not reliable or just in the status quo. First off, the crime labs. In the US, a lot of the convictions are through evidence gathered by crime labs, and the crime labs are part of the police departments in most cities. So, scandals in the Houston crime lab, in the Boston crime lab, where just evidence was made up for years and years, throwing people in prison because prosecutors want convictions. They want things to work through. The crime lab, without being independent, is not reliable. So for the U.S. public topic, you could change the way the crime labs are managed, have them be independent in terms of handling evidence and testing things. For example, one of many examples, the testing of hair at the scene of the crime has been used to convict a lot of people. Turns out that hair tests aren't accurate. So all those apparently get thrown out. Again, the crime lab should be an independent service or a number of services providing evidence for the accused as well as for the police and the prosecutors. A similar problem in the U.S. system is we have a right to a trial by jury. This is in the English system too, although not the European continental system. Jury trials are considered essential. You get convicted by a jury of your peers, but in the U.S. we don't have jury trials. 3% go to trial with juries, and the prosecutors do this by basically threatening people. We'll charge you with X if you agree to plead guilty. If you take your right to a trial by jury, we're going to throw the book at you, and you'll be charged with twice as much, way longer prison sentence. So that's basically a kind of blackmail, a kind of threat, and so people don't have jury trials, and people get railroaded into actually confessing to crimes they didn't commit because the risk is too high. So without jury trials, you have a lack of safeguards in the criminal justice system. Again, arguments against retribution. That's why we shouldn't punish people, because people who plead guilty, we don't know if they're really guilty because of the crime labs and the lack of jury trials. A separate argument is the system is way too slow, so there's little deterrence. I mean, one of the goals of the criminal justice system is deterrence. Economics of crime, economists say you want punishment so that people are less likely to commit crimes. They think twice before they commit a crime that could throw them in a long sentence. But if the punishment is uncertain, the deterrence is uncertain and ineffective. So if you want to have retribution as a system that deters crime, the current system doesn't deliver that. And so, so the argument is restitution gets around this problem. I'll come to that. Another aspect of the problem is overcriminalization. There's way too many things that are crimes in the U.S. system which deliver retribution. So people can be thrown in jail for, picking up a feather that turns out that came from a bird that used to be endangered, or for short lobsters. You catch a lobster that's too small, that's a criminal offense. Or trading orchids, as a man in the Houston area was accused of, orchids that were illegal in, I think, Peru. So therefore he was charged, and a SWAT team came and knocked down his door and chained him to a chair, and you know he was held in solitary without access to his medicines, a whole range of sort of horror stories. So the argument is we have way too many things that are crime, and this is basically a left and right issue. There's all sorts of environmental crimes that conservatives and others are upset with. You can go to jail for, if your tractor drips oil in a stream. Now the argument is maybe that should be a tort, but not necessarily a criminal offense. And for the other end of the political spectrum, progressives, for example, huge number of people are in prison for, smoking marijuana, small parts of marijuana, or other drugs that, may or may not have been something, may or may not even be illegal now. So many things are illegal. 3 felonies a day is the title of one book, and we'll come to more on that. So that's another reason why we shouldn't have punishment. The way it shouldn't be part of the system, because the system makes so many things crimes that too many people get punished. What's an alternative to the criminal justice system? You could abolish it entirely. There didn't used to be a criminal justice system. Instead, in England, there was the common law, and basically when you commit a crime, that's a tort against someone, and they deserve something. So in Iceland, you killed somebody, you had to confess before you passed 3 houses, and then you had to pay the victims or the family of the person you'd killed in anger. I'm not calling for Icelandic law from the 9th century, but alternatives to retribution, because retribution came when King John nationalized the legal system in England. So also retribution punishment, terrible due to corrupt, mismanaged prisons. If a prison was a place where people, let's say they smash a window in a riot, they're caught, and they have a $20,000 fine associated with that, or a damage associated with that, then they owe somebody $20,000 plus the cost of the criminal, the process, and so then they have to provide that money back to the person that they wronged, whether a private citizen or a company. So instead of retribution, punishment, sending them to prison, they have to repay the victim, compensate the victim. Retribution is expensive for victims as well as taxpayers. So the victim, I'm walking to my car, somebody mugs me, knocks me down, takes my wallet, breaks my leg. If they get convicted and go to prison, I still have a broken leg, I've still lost my wallet. And as a taxpayer, I have to pay for the prison and the cost for whatever expenses are involved with the prison operation. So a restitution system the goal is to repair the victim, justice to the victim, and it's the responsibility of the wrongdoer who's convicted in court by trial by jury to provide that. So rehabilitation is considered more just, because you're saying, look, this person committed a crime because of social issues or bad childhood or bad influence. We want to rehabilitate them, bring them back to be a better person. The argument is that's better than punishment, and also restitution, again, compensating the victim, is the core principle of the system. So this is Mark Kleinman.
If the criminal justice system were a parent, we would call it abusive and neglectful. It punishes too much and not often enough.
So I was unable to paste the link in here without pasting the whole video. You can find this on YouTube, Filling Up Prisons Without Fighting, and the speaker there, I think, has passed away, but it's fascinating where he says, the problem with the status quo with the punishment system is it doesn't work, it's insecure, it locks up way too many people, and it doesn't deter because it's mismanaged. And this is reference to the US system. So here it is, Mark Kleinman, Filling Up Prisons Without Fighting Crime. And that's the title of it. UCLA professor, too much crime, way too many people behind bars. the retribution-based system isn't working. A restitution-based system would focus on at each level of the crime. You want to find out who did it, and then that person's got to compensate the victim through a system that works on many levels. This is popular in the schools in terms of expelling people, but it's also could be a bigger part of the criminal justice system. Now, of course, when you have less crimes, you have a smaller criminal justice system as well. So U.S., 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisons. High incarceration isn't making us safe, he says. As part of a broader debate over the criminal justice system. Okay, so here's Restorative Justice. This is an organization that focuses on providing restitution. They tell the story in the website. Two men meet at a river. They'd each come to fish. They have a grievance. They've been angry for weeks. That's why maybe when their lines get tangled, words are exchanged. They start hitting each other, and one guy picks up a rock and hits the over of the head. The injured man doesn't die, but he requires extensive medical care, long recuperation, eventually able to move around supported by a cane. The question is, in this narrative, in this story, how does our criminal justice system respond? Well, in our system, it's a crime. This guy's convicted, goes to jail, serves a long term for attempted murder or some other. But this story is actually a biblical story, and in the Bible, it calls for restitution. And it says precisely what the person, the wrongdoer, the guy that cast the stone, hit the stone, has to do. He has to compensate the victim, take care of the family, see that the guy's healthy. And in this system, there's actually no cost to the public, right? The system is private in a sense. It's an act between the wrongdoer and the victim. The criminal justice system or the restorative justice system sees it as a tort. And again, it restores the victim, helps the victim's family, and doesn't involve prisons, cost to taxpayers. The Center for Justice and Reconciliation, part of Prison Fellowship, which is a Christian organization, tries to draw on these biblical lessons for reforming the status quo. And you might think of the Bible, the Old Testament, an eye for an eye, that's retribution. But there is a lot of restitution because all ancient societies had restitution as their core concept. They didn't have the money to build prisons. In England, they had transportation, sending people convicted to Georgia in the United States and then to Australia. But that's also expensive. And an alternative, again, is restitution. So, stronger reliance on restorative justice principles give criminals opportunities. So, I mean, the core then of prisons would be a place where people work, they gain job skills, they work for various private companies, they have a choice of who they work for, they have a choice of, what rooms they want to be in, whether they want to be in an inexpensive room with lots of people in it, or maybe not a safe or a safe room that's so they get to choose a room, and actually people have called for prison vouchers. Someone's gets a sentence of 10 years in prison, they get a voucher and they get to choose which prison they go to. Maybe they want a prison with a nice view over the ocean and stuff like that. Well, it sounds sort of silly, but companies would compete to provide incarceration services and job training services. This is why the criminal justice system should include compensating the prison for lower recidivism, right? So if the wrongdoer goes to prison for 5 years, comes out with job skills and a job, they're much likely to commit more crimes. That should be recognized in the system. Economics is all about incentives. There should be incentives for the system to try and provide the rehabilitation services to restore the victim, that is, provide a compensation for the victim. So the wrongdoer is in prison in a place working, earning income, paying for their expenses in the prison, their housing expenses and food, and part of their income goes to compensate the victim, part of their income goes to saving or perhaps supporting their family outside the prison. But that should be the role of the criminal justice system, and that provides deterrence, because who wants to spend 10 years in prison or 5 years in prison working to have to pay money for damage that you've done. Nobody wants that. So that's a kind of deterrence in and of itself. That's a kind of punishment. But it's also restoration. When you finish your 5-year sentence or the compensation you owe for the crime you did, you're out of prison and you're back as a citizen in society. You've paid your debt to society. You've paid your debt to the criminal. So this is a radical reform of the status quo, but it can also be done in smaller ways, as it is in schools, as it is in communities trying to deal with crime, where the wrongdoer meets with the victim and they discuss how things happen and they try and restore the sense of peace and calm in society. You can read more about this at the Restorative Justice website, and I have some articles on economic thinking. Right on Crime is an organization that's a conservative organization calling for less draconian sentencing and fewer prisons. Right, this starts in Texas. It's been very successful in reducing the cost of prisons. So the get tough on crime people, often conservatives, basically didn't want to bankrupt the state with too many prisons and too much crime, and they wanted stuff that worked. And prisons that are expensive and don't restore people, don't rehabilitate people, just lead to more crime later. So conservatives and progressives and liberals are on board in decreasing the number of crimes, and a whole range of reforms that are discussed